I'd like to welcome Geoff Havenaar. No, yeah, totally butchered. Okay, that's my maiden name. Havenaar is my maiden name. And Geoff has a almost exact same spelling, but he pronounces it. Go ahead, Geoff.
Havenaar.
Havenaar. Okay. I do have some relatives who pronounce it that way, but yeah, it's natural for me to say Havenaar. But welcome, Geoff. I'm so excited for this conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, I grew up in Sydney, Australia, to two loving parents who were very hardworking but struggled with money. We had most things provided for. My sister and I had most things provided for, but it wasn't easy for my folks. I had good education. Things came pretty easy for me in terms of school work until I kind of got to my teenage years. And I went to a selective high school and suddenly life became a lot more difficult. I guess hormones came into it as well. But in saying that, I went on and got a great job. I didn't follow the path that my father wanted me to follow, which was the natural path for most people, which was pretty much you go and study, get qualifications, and then you go out into the big wide world, get a job and continue on in this manner.
And just stay with that job forever, right?
In those days, yeah. And for my dad, it was a winning formula because my dad was a migrant, right, coming from Holland to Australia on a boat for 6 weeks with his family and young brothers. And so dad had to kind of work for the family, so he didn't get the opportunities. Whereas his two young brothers got the opportunities for education, and they went into accounting and became successful in that. And so for dad, that was the way for me.
Oh,
And although I started out on that sort of journey, I became a currency trader after school and was raking in the big bucks and had a flash car and all the accessories that go with that sort of money. But it also came with stress. And I was doing some things that were detrimental to my health and potentially detrimental to other people. And it was a bit of a wake-up call for me. It was kind of a shift in the direction of my life. But for my dad, it was a bit of a shock because what happened was I decided, well, I'm not going to be in this industry anymore. I'm going to go and travel and see the world. And for dad, that was, oh, what are you doing? You got to go and keep working.
The black sheep. What's going on?
Thank God my sister followed in a traditional way and followed in dad's footsteps in that sense. But it was a massive shift for me because what happened was the plan originally was to go and work, but while in Manhattan visiting a friend from high school, it was just so cold in New York. Like it was in winter time and freezing. And I said, surely I don't want to go to London now. Surely there must be somewhere warm nearby that I can go to. And sure enough, there was Mexico. I discovered there was a place called Mexico just down the road. So 6-hour flight, and I found myself in Mexico and it shifted the complete trajectory, I should say, of my life.
Wow. And what caused that? What did you encounter there?
I guess I was stepping outside of the paradigm that I'd grown up in of success is material, that you have to kind of make it in the material world to be successful. And that was important. And the people who I was meeting and the experiences I was having were more about spirit and connecting with something greater than me. For example, the guy that I was living in Manhattan with, he was supposed to be going back to Sydney for a wedding, and he believed I was moving on to go to London. And then on equinox, which reminds me, Shelley, this is a very important day today. I don't know if you're aware, the 21st of June.
Oh, is it summer?
June solstice, summer solstice. Longest day of the year. Very, very good for us Europeans.
Yeah, I like the sun.
So do I, as an Aussie. So suddenly in this place called Tikal in Mexico, I was climbing up a temple on equinox, and who should be at the top of this temple experiencing the same thing but my friend Aaron, all the way from Sydney, Australia, who I've been living with for a period of time there in New York.
Wow, so crazy.
Mind-blowing experiences, started me to kind of look a little bit into spirituality. There's something grander happening here than the views that or the views that I had previously.
Yeah, I think, yeah, taking us out of our comfort zone or the norm of what's going on in our life and the rigid part of our life will help us to see a different perspective and grow. So sometimes we don't want to get into the uncomfortable part or, expand, but that's where I think real growth really happens. But
Absolutely, it's outside the comfort zone, and traveling is a fun way to step outside of the comfort zone. It's not for everyone, but it was a great way for me to do that.
yeah.
It's like I got off the plane in Mexico City, and I left my wallet on the seat pocket in front of me. And
Oh,
so
no.
by the time I got to customs to go back, someone had already taken the wallet. And
Mm.
so I'd left with $7 in my pocket and my passport. That was it. That's all I had. My first night in Mexico City, or my first weekend, really.
Wow.
So really outside my comfort zone. And it wasn't the first
Yeah.
time something like that happened in the journey, but it made me grow up. Like I'd been cocooned for so long, and it really made me, as you say, step outside the comfort zone. And you have to step up I had to step up as a young man at that point to survive, I guess, in that
Yeah.
environment.
How long were you in Mexico?
In total, it was from probably about 4 months. Mexico,
Okay.
then went into Guatemala and Honduras, but in Central
Okay.
America for me. I had to kind of head home because of, sorry, another story, but the passport was stolen at some stage along the
Oh,
way.
goodness.
Yes,
Wow.
yes.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
makes it kind of hard
it
to
was
travel. So, but you were
that
able to
was
get back home because of to get a new passport, or how did that work?
yes. So you have to go to the police station, and at first to get a temporary one, so it's all in Spanish. So luckily, I had people with me at that time, and they were able to help me with that process. And then
Uh-huh.
I had to return back to Mexico City. So where I was from, that's like a 12-hour bus ride back to Mexico City to see the consulate to get a temporary passport to then tie me over until I went home.
Wow. Yeah, I bet that wasn't easy. That
It wasn't easy, but interestingly enough, sometimes those experiences that we have in life whereby it looks like it's crap, like it's a massive challenge, it looks not easy, I don't want to do this, turns out quite amazingly, because back in Mexico City, I had this yearning to buy a Bible. And I wasn't really a Christian. Like I was kind of raised a Christian, but my parents weren't churchgoers or anything like this.
uh-huh.
I had a connection to Jesus, but nothing serious. And so I just had this yearning to buy a Bible. And in Mexico City, it's very Catholic. So there's so many shops around where you can buy rosary beads and crosses and so forth. So I
Uh-huh.
go into this shop to buy this Bible. And finally, I find this one. I think it was a King James version, and it was about this thick. And I've got the Bible there. I'm like, oh, okay.
Was it in
And my
English then?
experience, it was in English, yeah, absolutely in English. But I was very hesitant because, firstly, it's a lot to carry around when you're traveling.
Yes.
And secondly, my upbringing was never really that the Bible's fun literature.
Right.
So I was a bit hesitant, but still I was being called. And as I was paying for this Bible, there was another book at the cash register, and it was a book on Shivananda yoga.
Hmm.
I was like, oh, this looks pretty good. So I got both the books, and then I
Okay.
left and I went to a pizza shop, and I was eating a pizza, and my background said, no, you should read the Bible first, Geoff. So I started looking at the Bible, and then I just felt myself nodding off, right? And I'm like, oh, all right, well, let's try the other one. And
Mhm.
the other one really spoke to me. Like it really engaged me about living a holistic life where one is, eating well, breathing well, thinking well, and so I mean, I kept the Bible. I didn't give it away. I've still got it, I think, back in Australia. But I was focused more on this particular book, and that was probably where I guess you could say, spiritual seed germinated,
Okay.
and set me forth on the actual trajectory that I went on.
Wow. That's incredible. And I don't think there's any coincidences, right? I think just like the meeting of you and your friend back in Mexico, those books being there at that time and you seeing it kind of calling to you. Yeah, I think there's no coincidence. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, and I could say like, oh, the passport being stolen. Oh no,
Yeah.
and I did say oh no, but as it
Right.
turned out, that was a godsend, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes, yeah, those trials really can help us if we're focusing on the right thing, like just trusting. And yeah, it can be hard in the moment, but just to trust that it all will be okay is good. So I wanted to,
That's the key.
yeah. So how did this yoga, what was this journey for you with this from this book? How did that take you?
So I kept the book with me. I read it. I started practicing meditation. I was starting doing yoga. I was connecting with people who were also interested in these things, who were also recommending different books to me. And then I had to go home for the passport, and then went on to London to go and work again. And while I was in London, life was pulling me towards partying and drug culture and this sort of lifestyle. And so I'd kind of do the yoga and the meditation during the week, and then get pulled into, maybe not pulled into, perhaps I chose it, into that culture on the weekends. It was just kind of to
Enticed.
and froing while I was in London.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kept going for a while. And then at some point, it was time to come home after about 3 years of doing this. There was more meditation and more yoga. So I'd go on yoga retreats and so forth than there was on the party side.
Mm-hmm.
But it was still this, what I would now recognize as old self versus the new self. Like the new self's trying to emerge, and the old self's doing everything it can to keep us in place, I guess. Um, and then, yeah, so then I went with my partner at the time to India. And while we were 4 days in India, we came across a brochure for a class. It was kind of, I guess it was a Buddhist class, if you will. And so I went to do this class, met the teacher, and ended up moving all my stuff into this center. It's kind of like an ashram, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It was beautiful. Like they had floor to ceiling glass windows with views out towards the Himalayas, within an
Wow.
apple orchard. There was people from, excuse me, there was people from different parts of the world there, 20 or so people, and we would meditate in the morning, do classes in the afternoon and yoga, and just talk about spirituality. Basically, it was amazing 3 months there.
Wow.
It was absolutely incredible. So I think all that kind of culminated. It was really guiding me to get to that experience. So that's my teacher actually, Behram.
Okay.
So it's really guiding me towards him, and he still is a focal point for me, life mentor, to this day.
Wow. That's incredible. And did the yoga take you there, like India? Is that kind of why you went there?
Um, is that why I went there? Not really, actually. So the
Oh,
yoga, the book that I had was a Shivananda yoga book. And the only center that I could find in London happened to turn out to be a Shivananda yoga center. So that, again, the coincidences, the synchronicities were amazing to me.
yeah.
Um, they're really things that fulfill me in life when those things happen. But the India thing was just, we'd been traveling a lot. We'd already been through Africa and been through the Central America, and so India was somewhere else to go to. It wasn't
Okay.
necessarily to seek spirituality, and so it was a bit of a shock, really, to find myself in that environment. But once I was in there, I just felt completely at home, and I got a chance to look at my belief systems, my values, how I was perceiving the world, why I was moving, like still old self gravitating towards drugs and so forth, and just connecting with God daily, being focused on that, having that as your focus was incredible life experience.
Yeah, I think that the world, the negative in the world, those things that pull you down, they're always out there. And that we have to have that daily focus, that moment by moment focus sometimes, that spiritual side of us. and really honing in, and the consistency helps us to fight all that chaos and things that are going on in our lives. But so
Yeah.
I want, will you explain, so you were taken, you became a life coach, a parenting coach, is that correct?
Mm.
So can you,
Yes. So after my time in India, it was time to go home to Australia. So
okay,
the 5 years of kind of working a little bit and traveling had come to an end, and it was time to, well, as my dad would say, and I love my dad dearly. We just have different ways of viewing the world. Get
uh-huh.
a life. So for him, it was making a life. And Master B was also about that. You need to go back and serve and do something that's fulfilling for you, not just buying and selling currencies to make money. So you've got to change the trajectory a little bit. So when I went home, it was like, well, what to do? And again, synchronicities led me to a couple of different people, which led me to kinesiology and life coaching. And so I studied these things plus continued classes with Master B. I brought him to Australia, but my focus was on kinesiology and life coaching, and that's what I started doing after my studies.
Okay. And I feel like yoga, yeah, played a role, or still does, in that transition, and how it just helps you, well, knowing yourself, I think, is important, so that then you can help other
Absolutely.
people. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. The healing was for the self. So the asanas, the physical aspect of the yoga dropped off for me. And so I was doing that less and less. The meditation practice was a constant throughout. So that was always a morning and evening practice. The breathing and so forth come and go. And so did the eating, like good nutrition, that would also come and go. But the learning was always a part of the process.
Yeah.
Learning about the teachings.
Yeah. So you have two daughters, correct?
Yes, I have two daughters who have chicken pox at the moment. I
Oh
found out
no.
this evening. They don't live with me, unfortunately, anymore. So one's 10, Sophie's 10, Nina's 8, and they've both got chicken pox. The oldest said, Nina gave me the chicken pox, Papa. So yeah, they're struggling a bit.
Oh, they'll get through it. It'll be, I actually, all my brothers had chicken pox and I never did. I don't know what, I just immune to it,
Yeah.
I guess. So but I
Yeah,
remember
it's
them
nice.
dealing with it. But so with, I know you shared some experiences with me with like parenting, and then you've talked about your dad, that trajectory, I don't know, influence, I guess, in your life from your dad and his perspective of life. And then how is that for you as a parent? And now,
Mm.
taking on that role as a parent.
Yeah, super question. Old conditioning is hard to let go of. And sometimes it's very hard to let go of. So previously the life coaching was never around parenting in the old days. It was just helping whoever came to see me.
Mhm.
But as a parent, things were pretty good for the most part early on with our two children. We'd created, my ex-wife and myself created good work-life balance. So we were always around through those formative years, those first 7 or so years. So always there for them. They had a safe environment. We had good routines. So Tyrolean women tend to be quite stringent in their routines. Australian men tend to be a bit loose. So it
Yeah.
was good that Eva was there to hold the reins, hold those boundaries in place. Because I think routine is paramount in the early years to ensuring that, in terms of sleep structures and discipline, these boundaries are important for children. And so for the most part, the kids were pretty easy to get along with. Like the oldest would occasionally press my buttons, but really it was pretty easy going. And then one day Sophie was 7, I think, or maybe just turning 8. And I found her crying in her bedroom. And I went in to check on her and say, "What's up, sweetie?"
Mhm.
And Nina just took my toy and yeah, so she was quite upset by the fact that Nina had taken her little toy, which I think was Nina's anyway, actually.
Oh yeah.
Um, And so then I responded with loving intention that, sweetheart, you shouldn't be feeling like this over something so small. It's just a little toy. It's okay. And besides, didn't you take it from her 2 hours ago?
Yeah.
And as I was saying this to her, Shelley, like I was looking into her eyes and I was like she was crying, but then I was suddenly overcome with sadness and tears started rolling down my cheeks. Oh, what's going on here? And then that was replaced pretty quickly with guilt. Like I just felt this incredibly bad. I just felt bad. Just felt really bad. And just couldn't really put a finger on it in the moment of what was happening. And then it dawned on me that I just, in that particular moment in time, I hadn't validated her feelings. I hadn't validated her experience, and therefore I hadn't validated her.
Right.
And it made me then wonder how often I had done that to her in the past. And so it set me on a journey to learn what it means to, well, it set me on a journey originally to find out about this experience, like what was going on for me, really. And then that opened up the doorway because then I started to see, wow, there's so much information out here on parenting. There's a whole new paradigm of how people parent these days. And I had, well, I won't say no clue because some of the things we were unconsciously doing, but in terms of emotional intelligence, I had absolutely no clue.
Oh, yeah.
And if I carried on doing the same thing, I was doing my children harm by not being present to them when they're going through those particular things. So that was the catalyst, not originally to be a parent coach, but it was certainly a catalyst because one of the main things I learned from my teacher was that we're all struggling through life based on our upbringing, from our childhood traumas, whatever they were for us, not feeling worthy enough, not good enough, and so forth. And so we're all kind of just trying to get make our way through this thing called life. And so it's a challenging thing, really. And so I had to kind of do the work on myself, I felt first. And once I started to do that, I was like, oh, wow, okay, well, this is what it means to be a parent, where before I was really just flying blind. So I sought out people who could teach me how to be a parent coach, or how to be a better parent, firstly. And that was how it all sort of began.
So, and I think as parents, I mean, there's not a book when our child is born of how to raise that kid, right? There are some principles that we can follow, but it's even from one kid to the next, it's different because they're different beings. And so, but I, like you were saying earlier, those routines are helpful. And then the validation, I think, is sometimes hard because so many things are going on, and if we can just slow down and take that time. I know I've been a culprit of that, of just not taking time to have that validation and take that moment to understand. What are some tips there for a parent to be able to do that?
Well, for me, the number one thing is most of us parents, as you were alluding to, assume the role of parenting. We just have a baby, oh, wow, we're parents. And we might do a little bit of reading about how to breastfeed, or if there's a problem, changing nappies and so forth. But there's normally, or at least for me, I can only speak for me and my partner at the time, there was no education. We didn't teach ourselves, we didn't train ourselves how to understand the psychology of a child, how to be emotionally present to the child, how to instill growth and empowering beliefs versus the limiting ones. And we certainly weren't conscious that we had to parent ourselves first and our own wounded inner child before we go and parent the one that we had. So for me, first and foremost, I would say it's imperative that the parent do as much learning as they possibly can and try and find the areas that they're unconscious in. I think I mentioned to you before briefly that and maybe Socrates said this, that we don't know what we don't know. And for me, I had no idea that by being intentionally love, like I was loving, like I had loving intentions for my daughter that she shouldn't be feeling this way because I was trying to fix it and trying to get her to think differently.
Yeah.
But I was completely ignorant to the fact that when a child is, and an adult sometimes, are in emotional distress or dysregulation, as it's called now, that they're not able to process any sort of logic whatsoever. So it's just bouncing off their cranium. So really, you've got to connect emotionally. And so I think for parents, it's imperative, firstly, that we educate ourselves. Well, firstly, have the honesty and the humility that perhaps, hang on a minute, perhaps I'm not the best parent in the world. Perhaps I don't know everything, and that I could learn something. They're probably the two things. Then I would just go and learn it and apply it consistently and persistently. Really, there's just 3 steps for me in this process.
Yeah, I think the key is to humble ourselves right there. The first step is just to realize you're not all that, you're not perfect. There is learning. And I think learning comes from the interaction too with your child, like just to learn about
Yes.
what a perspective is.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Learning about, you can learn about the 2 things, learning about the interaction with the child and what the feedback you get. But if you're perceiving that feedback through a trauma of your own childhood, then that could be distorted.
right.
So,
Yeah.
so a lot of it really has to be addressing our own triggers. So if the child is triggering us, it's not the child's fault. It's not the child's behavior. They're not trying to make us late for work or what have you.
Right.
They just have an unmet need, and they need our love and they need our presence to move through that. And I didn't have that training from my parents. They had no idea. And so then I'm assuming, I'm guessing that there's a lot of people who are like me out there who also didn't have that sort of training and who are also just assuming the role of parenting without understanding their own blind spots, I guess.
And how can we find those blind spots? Because like you said, we don't know what we don't know. So
Yes, yeah, great question. For me, uh, I would say her name is Sophie. So
your daughter.
yeah, it's our children. They're really the ones who are going to show us whenever we are feeling discomfort within ourselves, or whenever I'm feeling discomfort within myself about something that she's doing. For example, new apartment, the kids are over, there's people on either side, it's kind of a communal garden, the kids are out there screaming, and I'm feeling uncomfortable. These are my emotions now. Does it serve those innocent young girls out there for me to go and scream at them and tell them to be quiet? Oh, be quiet, get inside now. That's unfair to them. That's completely unfair. They're just doing their own thing. And so
Right.
it's my wound. So what is it that's going on in me that's causing this discomfort? Oh, okay. Oh, could it be that I worry about what other people think, or I don't want to give people the wrong idea? And so then I have to look at that within myself and see if that serves me or not to have this belief or not, and then try and heal my way through it. It's certainly a process, but all parents have this. Like in winter, I work as a ski instructor. I work on ski fields and so forth, and I constantly seeing parents telling their kid what to do. Like the kid finishes and the kid's had enough. The parents go, "No, come on, one more time, one more. Oh, my kid's the best skier." And these expectations that we put on the children are they're just massive, and it all comes from the parents. From my experience, it all comes from the parents' unmet needs. And really, that's the process. We have to maybe find a coach or read a book or do some self-reflection through journaling. And I get it's hard. Like I get it's hard, and it's easy for me to be saying this because I'm the father and I'm sitting outside of this experience per se. But it's still present for me, and therefore I'm sure it's present for many other parents. And so yeah, I just would encourage people to just try and seek out that support and find those blind spots and instead of yelling at the kid, go, oh, what's the kid trying to teach me now?
Yeah, I think that's the key too. And like you said, kind of hit it about stepping back outside yourself almost, like just taking a look at yourself outside of your feelings of what's going on, but to really dive deep of kind of inside,
Yeah,
but step
absolutely.
outside the moment, I guess.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. It starts with an awareness of what's happening in their life situation. So for parents, if you find you're yelling at the child, or if you're feeling triggered all the time, or you're a lot of unease or discomfort with the child, or you're feeling fearful, anxiety, any of these sorts of uncomfortable emotions that you're having around parenting are the warning signs that parent themselves need to do the work on themselves. It's not about changing the child. And look, I'm not a clinical psychologist, but I have worked with clinical psychologists before, and all their stories are all about the same thing. And I was a kinesiologist as well, I guess, but it's all about the same thing. They bring the child in, fix my child. But every time it's about parent and the parent's expectations on the child, or the parent's own wounds that they're dealing with. And so that's a tough one for parents, because parents in general do not like to be, and I'm the same, we all have an ego, don't like to be told that perhaps we're not parenting correctly or what have you. We don't like that. But I'm not really saying that you're not parenting correctly. I'm saying if you're having these uncomfortable emotions and your child is triggering you, maybe not look at the child, do the work on the self. And that's where it's at.
yeah, and I actually have 3 that are in college now. I have 5 girls, and one of them, she is very vocal about correcting me and and saying it should be done this way as a parent, like, okay. And she
How's
is,
your first reaction? How's your
well,
first
yeah,
reaction to that?
I she's smart. Well, at sometimes, yes, because she's adamant about saying it over and over, but she has a good point, and she's usually right. Like, okay, yeah, I see it that way. And sometimes it's been hard because, I mean, it's because I'm doing things because I'm concerned for them and what they're
Right.
doing, right? And I want the best for
Absolutely.
them. And she's saying,
Absolutely.
back off, basically, we're adults, back off. I'm like, and so I don't know, just like coincidence, we talked about how things happen like one after another. When she was talking to me, several other things helped me to see that, yeah, she's definitely right in what I
Mm,
needed to be changing. And so the learning, like we were talking about, learning from our children and what their needs
correct.
are,
Yeah.
having that
And,
conversation.
and fascinating that you said there that more often than not she's right.
Yeah.
And it's true. Like, children have a lot more wisdom than we give them credit for. Children are happy. Children are just happy. They're just mostly joyful. It's us parents who are a little bit crazy with a lot more responsibility. But children have got it going on. And look, I grew up from authoritarian, old paradigm parenting,
Mhm.
that my way or the highway, you do what I say. So back chatting and pointing out some sort of hypocrisy in my mum or my dad would just be met with a backhand,
Mm,
so you don't do it.
yeah.
And so I grew up with a mask on as a pleaser, to please people, to please my neighbors. So my daughters, be quiet, please the neighbors. But
Right.
that can be dysfunctional in the long run. And so, of course, when my 10-year-old points out something about me and shows my hypocrisy in a particular moment, my instinctive reaction is what my dad was, coming up.
Right. Right.
And I've done enough practice and enough work over the time now that I can catch that and, oh, okay, so breathe. Oh, yeah, you got a good point there. Because really, at the end of the day, for parenting, it's about creating a it's about creating a beautiful, loving, intimate, open, honest relationship with our children.
Yeah.
Like, that's really what we're after. And if we can do that, if we can cultivate that from an early stage and make that the focus, then the child is, for the most part, reasonably like putty. They'll want to follow our lead. They'll want to do what we say. And discipline doesn't really necessarily come so much into it. I know
Yeah.
there's variations on the theme, but on the whole, that's the goal, create a wonderful relationship with the child so they respect and love you. And that requires treating them with dignity and respect. And it's not a one-way street.
Yes.
And that's tough when a mum or a dad is under pressure and they got to deal with a partner who's given them grief and financial issues and all these sorts of things. That is super, super difficult. I get that. But it's essential. It's essential because otherwise the children grow up not emotionally mature. They don't have emotional intelligence. They don't have a sense of self-worth. And then they go through life kind of surviving. They're not thriving in their capacity as human beings. Lots of us are not thriving. That's why the self-help industry, for example, is so big with all the books, because we're all trying to heal from our childhood traumas. So it's a big, complex thing, but in a nutshell, create a beautiful relationship with the child. That's the most important, and that requires humility from the parent.
Yeah. And like you're saying, it's not a putting it on them. It has to be, that respect has to be equal, like back and forth. Yes, there is, you know, we have our different roles, parent, child, but also that respect and having that open conversation and the love, I think and with the respect, like you said, the discipline won't be needed so much, right? Because they're respecting you, they love you, you have an equal understanding of things, just having that open communication.
Yeah, spot on. I think Gabor Mate said it pretty well. He said that you create this incredibly great relationship with your child to the point where they're kind of like your disciples in a way. Mm-hmm. And disciples are sort of people who want to follow you. Like Jesus' disciples, they want to follow Jesus because Jesus stands for these wonderful qualities of love and acceptance and forgiveness. And that's what you want to project out for your children, not some sort of hypocritical being that I don't know if he's going to erupt at any particular moment or not.
Right.
It's humility, and you've got to communicate that with the child. You can't you can't go the other way, I don't think, and try and just be calm and, well, my child's really pissing me off now, but I'm going to stay calm. It's not that. It's about being authentic. Oh, look, I'm really sorry, Sophie. Like, you triggered me just before then with what you said. That's Papa's stuff. It's not your stuff. Sorry, I'm working on this. Let's move through it. So you create a respect from them that you're a human being, not a boss. And they love you, and then they want to do pretty much anything for you. Pretty much.
And earlier that you mentioned about journaling, maybe getting coaching and some things like that. So do you have any suggestions of, for example, like the journaling, how people can go about maybe overcoming or working through those difficult emotions that are coming up for them?
Absolutely, yeah. So the first one for the emotion one would be to research about emotional intelligence and emotional regulation, because there are a lot of processes you can do around this. The second thing to be aware of is that it takes time. You're not going to just be able to do it straight away. So you're like,
darn,
I fall off the wagon. We all want the quick fix, right?
Right.
We're going to fall off the wagon. So these are the two precursors going into this particular thing. The third thing is then just around awareness. So when it's coming up, try and catch it and just breathe through it as best you can. Just breathe, whatever breathing technique you've got. There are, particular breathwork process you can do. But for now, I'd just be breathing through. Take a step aside, count to 10, come back, basic things, really.
Yeah.
But then later on, when you've got a bit of time, because you're in the emotional state yourself, you're not there to try and process it, thinking, why am I feeling like this in that moment? You're just creating love for yourself. Oh, I'm being triggered. This is uncomfortable. I love and accept you. It's not a bad emotion. This is natural. This is for healing. And then later, when you've got a little bit of, hopefully, perhaps a bit of time, then sit and reflect on it. Maybe speak to your partner if you've got one, or speak to a trusted friend who can hold the space for you, and or journal, speak to God and write to God perhaps, and just say, this is what I felt. Women are much better than this normally than men.
Okay.
So I don't know what your listener base is, but for women, it's become a little bit easier because they can feel where it is in their body and so forth. And then have a look at it and say, well, what was it that my child did? So maybe write the question, what was it that my child did? What was their behavior that triggered me? What was that? Okay, so it could be that their room is untidy again. Or it could be that they're not listening to me. Or it could be anything. So you just write that down and then explore that. Let that question sit there for a little while and allow whatever to come up. Maybe write if something comes up for you and you want to write it. I wouldn't say specifically have a practice of journaling every day because there's enough to do for parents. But I would just create that soft space around, oh, okay, my daughter was talking back to me and showing my hypocrisy. Okay, well, what is it about me that I need to work on? Am I not stepping up? Could I speak to it differently? These sorts of things would be a great starting point.
Awesome. That's a great suggestion. Before we close, do you have anything else that you'd like to share? And also then if you'd share where people can connect with you and the bonus that you have for them.
Well, first thing would be that parenting is a super difficult job. Being a human being is a super different job. Being in a relationship with your partner is a super difficult thing. These emotional things, most of us weren't given the tools to deal with it in the current modern day environment. It is challenging. So probably the greatest or the best thing I can share is just to be easy on yourself. Yeah. You don't have to be the best parent in the world. Being your best parent self really means having the humility to look at where your weaknesses are and doing better and trying to grow and expand yourself and then working on your strengths and just being vulnerable around this. It's very normal. So that would be the takeaway. And of course, as I said before, the learning aspect. Like we need to learn how to nurture beautiful relationships with children. We need to learn how to let go of the emotional stuff that we're holding on. They're probably the main things I would want to leave with your listeners and with myself. When I'm talking, I always have to listen to what I'm saying. It's always advice for me.
Yeah, we're always learning, right? We're always learning for ourselves and each other. So I love this. And the humility of being vulnerable to not being perfect, right? Not being that to being humble, I guess, by your children. So
yeah, look, we're constantly making mistakes. I had my oldest was here on the weekend, and she's going through lots of social aspects with friends, and I found myself going down a road that wasn't skillful and wasn't beneficial for her. And one of the problems of being a separated dad who's not with them all the time is that I can't remedy that so quickly. So I'm still making these mistakes. And so I just have to learn and say, okay, I'll readdress that with her next time.
That's good. So go ahead and tell people where they can find you and what you have for them.
Well, where you can find me at the moment, if you can leave the links at the bottom of the podcast, Shelley, that would be great. Facebook page, Being Your Best Parent Self, or Being Our Best Parent Self, so that particular page is called. There's also a link I shared with you that would give them access to a free ebook that is about the gifts we can give to our children about nurturing our relationships, and then we can then they can kind of join the community if you like and keep updated with any blogs I might be sharing or any news and that sort of stuff, courses and so forth.
Perfect. And I'll have all those links in the show notes, so that'll be good. So thank you so much, Geoff, for being on. It's been so great to talk to you about this and have this conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this and share all this knowledge, and it's wisdom that all this thing you're sharing. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, look, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed being here with you. And yeah, bye to everyone. Good luck with your parenting journey and your own journey. It's so worthwhile.